In 1972, he met with the man Tanzanians call Mwalimu, the teacher.
McNamara responded very positively to Nyerere right from the beginning. Nyerere was speaking exactly his language about Tanzania specifically, and McNamara could clearly see this as a model for what he thought other developing countries should be doing.
McNamara was enthusiastic about Nyerere's plan for a vast rural resettlement program to be carried out in a year.
In order to make the optimum use of the country's meager resources to benefit the majority of the masses, it became necessary to devise ways and means to abandon the old method of living in scattered homesteads and instead live together in villages and work together for the good of all.
3 million peasants were ordered to move into cooperative, so-called Ujamaa villages. If they didn't want to go, they were forced.
At least one incident that I witnessed was the demolition of a peasant's house, which was pulled down because this particular individual was resisting to move to the planned village, if you like. There was force indeed.
I did have a personal experience when I was going home. People had been moved from their homes, deposited in an open space where there was no shelter, and they had children, and a few of them were suffering from pneumonia.
Even though the World Bank's own specialists reported that resettlement was wrecking the country's agricultural production, the bank continued to finance the Tanzanian experiment.
The very strongly held view of our agricultural people expressed in a report that went to the government that this concentration of peasants in villages was completely inconsistent with the agricultural practices which were in fact relevant to the country at that time, which was a more dispersed agriculture. But the phrase that I used was that, look, we have to give the Tanzanians enough rope to hang themselves. And that wasn't said in any spiteful way. It was said in the sense of, look, the Tanzanians are running this. Economics has a lot to teach, but we can't be arrogant.
I think the Ujamaa experiment in Tanzania completely failed. When I went back, I asked the government, take me to a village, an Ujamaa village which is working. This is in the mid-80s. And they couldn't show me one. They'd all collapsed. And people had drifted back to their own lands. And it had caused immense dislocation in the countryside and among ordinary people. There was deep disillusionment. People were hungry, people were poor, and the whole thing had completely collapsed.
It was in 1979, almost literally, that the lights went out in Dar es Salaam. The overstrained Tanzanian economy could no longer pay its way. A few years later, in 1985, Julius Nyerere stood down as president of the country. Across the continent, the great hope of rapid economic takeoff through industrialization and central planning was dead. Tanzania is still recovering, but some of those who designed its policies still dream of their revival.
I have probably been imprudent in not assessing the risks and not assessing how long those things which I, and more particularly the people I was working for, thought were desirable. But I suppose, more or less to paraphrase Ecclesiastes, my dreams as an old man are somewhat similar to my visions as a young man.
You seem, in our conversation, to be remarkably unabashed, considering the catastrophic experience in Africa in the last 30 years.
Well, there is certainly enough blame to go around for everyone, although much of the disaster's war. And I really cannot accept much of the blame for any of the wars in Africa.
The West hadn't helped Africa to develop, but Africa still haunted Western dreams of transformation. Their focus was no longer on the creation of wealth. Instead, it was on the alleviation of extreme poverty. Africa became a cry for help. In 1973, Jonathan Dimbleby had heard that there was a problem in northern Ethiopia which the government was concealing.
Can you give me some examples of the kind of things that the children have got?
Yes. Come, Dennis. This is a severely...
It's too weak to stand.
Yes.
I have to say it was the worst 10 days of my life. Any human being seeing that and witnessing that and feeling impotent. The children dying, the children being brought out dead in the morning, the smell, the dirt, the slight fear too that you are going to pick up some disease that will carry you away as well. I had no idea that it would be on the scale of what we actually discovered. No idea at all. I mean, it lives with me now, those first images. They were terrible. I'd never seen anything like it before, and I hoped I'd never see anything like it again.
Jonathan Dimbleby brought Ethiopia to the world's attention when he made his film The Unknown Famine in 1973. But he had to edit out some of the truth to make the necessary impact.
We made a very conscious decision to exclude very key facts. We left out what I then already knew, that the war with Eritrea was causing immense financial damage. Left it out for one very simple reason. We thought that if we put it in, then a lot of people watching would have said, oh, well, that's Africa, isn't it? Forget about them. They'll only waste the money if we send any money. There's no point in giving any support.
The film had an enormous effect. Shown in Ethiopia the following year, it prompted riots and helped fuel the revolution against the old emperor. That year, 1974, Dimbleby returned to cast a sympathetic eye over the early stages of the revolution.
In jubilation, thousands of peasants converge on the town of Silti in southern Ethiopia to celebrate the revolution, their liberation. After 3,000 years of feudal oppression, this day is an assertion of their rights, a statement of their belief in the revolution.
It wasn't only idealistic journalists who sympathized, so did powerful Western institutions. The new Ethiopian leader, Mengistu Haile Mariam, seemed, to the World Bank, an opportunity, despite his communist convictions. The bank had been pressing land reform, the dismantling of the feudal estates, on Emperor Haile Selassie with little success. Mengistu was committed to land reform.
I had personal discussions with Mengistu to assure him that yes, he came out of the Communist Party, they were going for socialism, etc. That meant nothing to the bank. What we were concerned with, not the ideologies of countries, we were concerned with effective policies. And because he had introduced the land reform, we would be supporting him. And as a token of that, we doubled the lending program and committed ourselves to support him.
But in the hands of Mengistu, land reform was to become just one aspect of a drive for total power, with devastating consequences for the country.
Mengistu was a soldier, very efficient, highly intelligent, and much respected by his colleagues. No one, I think, recognized the scale of his depraved ambition. He was absolutely cool. He was absolutely ruthless and wholly merciless. It was believed, and I'm certain that my sources for it are valid and authoritative, that there was a cabinet meeting of the generals, 8 to 10 fellow officers in the room. And he said, "Excuse me, gentlemen, I just got to leave the room for a moment." He walked out. Bodyguards came in with machine guns, and they mowed down everyone in the room.
Did you realize you were sitting opposite a major political gangster?
No, not at the time. I thought I was sitting opposite someone from the military who, in fact, recognized that if Ethiopia was going to be transformed socially and economically, then the old guard around the emperor just had to go. And that wasn't a kid-gloved operation. It was an operation which required someone who might have many of the qualities of being a gangster.
But in fact, thousands of people were killed by this government to which the World Bank was lending and wished to lend. Mm-hmm. Isn't there a moral issue there?
There is a moral issue, but is the bank involved in morality? Now, in the 70s, I don't think, to be very frank, that question arose.
In 1979, the bank did cut off loans to Mengistu, not on moral grounds, but because he wouldn't pay compensation to international firms whose holdings he'd nationalized. The West was happy to forget the problems of a country run by a Marxist dictator, until it was forced to confront them.
Dawn, and as the sun breaks through the piercing chill of night on the plain outside Coram, it lights up a biblical famine, now in the 20th century. This place, say workers here, is the closest thing to hell on earth.
80,000 people were starving to death, and there was no process of acclimatization. You step off the plane, and into the middle of all this, there are people dying. There are worse things than people dying. There are people who, because you're a European, think that you must be a doctor or somebody who can provide food. You must be useful, and you're not. You're just a journalist. So they would bring their children, these scrawny, dying children, and hold them up in front of you, which had a profound emotional effect because, you were just useless.
This 3-year-old girl was beyond any help, unable to take food, attached to a drip, but too late. The drip was taken away. Only minutes later, while we were filming, she died.
I mean, the images were pretty shattering, but already by that time, I knew that there was another story to be told.
Barbara Hendry traveled to Ethiopia soon afterwards, working for 2 years in the famine relief operation in rebel-held Eritrea and Tigray.
It talked of a biblical famine, and it very much gave the impression that this was a natural catastrophe. The fact that there was a war going on in the heart of the region where the famine was just got buried, really from the beginning.
Michael Burke did refer to the war in his report, but the close connection between the war and the famine was lost in the upsurge that followed.
When he saw the TV pictures from Ethiopia, Bob Geldof of the Boomtown Rats decided he had to do something, and he found his pop friends felt the same.
Mike, we just got £1 million from the Dubai.
Band Aid started the biggest charitable fundraising drive in history. The Live Aid concerts alone raised over $70 million. Mainstream charities were spurred into action, while Bob Geldof redefined the process of giving.
Don't go to the pub tonight, please. Stay in and give us the money. There are people dying now, so give me the money. And here's the numbers. We read them out.
But some were less certain about what was happening.
I find it so troubling that so much good intention can be invested in something that can actually go so deeply, tragically awry. And this really is a tragedy of good intentions.
Alex de Waal has spent the past 15 years studying famine in the Horn of Africa. He's one of a number of critics who believe that the Ethiopian aid operation wasn't a success, but a good example of Western misunderstanding of African reality.